Hello everyone, I'm opinionated and I like trolling people. So let's finally talk about some game-related issues. Consoles are often said to have more or better exclusives than the PC, but that's not entirely true. First of all, the consoles don't have more exclusives. If you think that, you're just wrong. But why even have exclusives? So there are pretty much three different reasons to have them. First and most obviously, a game is often an exclusive if the developer is a first or second party developer. In that case, the games are released in that way so that you have no choice but to buy the first party system should you want to play that specific game. Anything that Nintendo releases is Nintendo exclusive. Anything that Naughty Dog releases is Sony exclusive. This is a rather anti-consumer move, but if I were to decide, if I were in that position, I might still do it the same way. Still doesn't make it less of a dick move though. The second reason for an exclusive is that the game cannot physically run or be played well on other systems. The PC being vastly more powerful than the console allows for more demanding games to run. If I were a developer, I wouldn't want to make my games terrible so that they can run on consoles. If my vision were larger than a console could handle, I would just make it a PC exclusive. And then there are games that you can't play with a controller, such as the Anno series where you just need your mouse and keyboard a lot. Or some MMORPGs where you have like 40 different buttons you need to hit. Those just wouldn't fly on a console, that just wouldn't work, you couldn't play that stuff. And seemingly for no reason at all, some third-party games are released on just one system. Or just on the consoles, even though they could run perfectly fine on the PC. In that case, the developer and/or publisher is just dumb because the PC generates so much more revenue. Or maybe there's just some other behind-the-scenes contractual stuff going on there, who knows. As for the number of exclusives, I'll just link an article in the description that shows you that consoles in fact don't have more than the PC. Now let's move on to a more interesting point, which is the quality of those games. I mean, the fun can't really be described objectively, everyone has fun in different ways, but the PC offers so much more variety than the consoles do. Just look at all the games that are released for the consoles. They're either sports games or racing games, that's technically a sport, isn't it? And you got your third-person adventure games and some shooter games, and that's pretty much it. Sure, this is ignoring Nintendo's games, and this is also ignoring that there are some indie games on the console, but the vast majority of AAA games you can play on the next-gen consoles are just the same. And on the PC side, you have all those genres, plus you have city builders, you have simulators for virtually everything, you have MMORPGs, you have MOBAs, and you probably have some genres that I'm forgetting about. And as far as console exclusivity for games goes, I can't really think of any reason other than the console not having anything to offer other than those specific games. They're the only selling point they have left. So the only way to create demand for this console is to create artificial demand by locking everybody else out of those games. But now both Microsoft and Sony are realizing that the PC audience is vast, there are a lot of people there. Xbox exclusives are becoming Microsoft exclusives, and all Sony games can soon be played on PlayStation Now. Sure, the PC players will have to wait a bit, but who cares? And add to that a lot of console games just don't offer a lot of replayability. You've got your single-player adventures that are done within, 10 hours at best, and then the game's done. There's no real reason to play him again. Whereas many of the games I play on the PC offer hundreds if not thousands of hours of gameplay. Be that only through the multiplayer sometimes, but at least the online multiplayer is free, except for World of Warcraft where you have to pay monthly. So I recently got back into Warcraft 3 and it's a game from 2002, and because it's the PC or not a console you can still play it. And it's great. I mean, the main campaign isn't that long, but the game offers so much replayability because of the map editor. It's a real-time strategy game that pretty much gave birth to the MOBA genre, because that's where Dota came from. And that was copied and then made into League of Legends as a standalone game later. So because you could create your own maps for the thing, you basically had infinite replayability because so much could be done with the editor. It was a great tool. I personally had tons of fun playing a lot of tower defense games. There are many other games on the PC that offer this infinite replayability, such as the Heroes of Might and Magic series. Well, predominantly games number 3 and 5. But a single match on those games could last for hours. A single match can last longer than the entirety of some other games. And look at things like The Sims. You can have infinite replayabilities because you'll never have the same characters, you'll never have the same buildings, you can always do something new. And this is why I have bought a maximum of like maybe 5 games during the last year, because I have so much to play, because I have so many games that offer so many hours you can put into them. Imagine paying $60 or something for a game and that game being over after 8 hours. Or paying $60 for a game that you can enjoy for hundreds of hours. And some of those adventure games drive it a bit far with the movie aspect of them. They're basically just motion pictures with the occasional button press. Seems like the game's just checking if you're still awake. An argument that I've heard a lot of times is that the games get released on consoles first and PC last, as in, the consoles are the more important platform. But that's also not entirely how it goes. The way it goes is that the consoles are easier to develop for. So that means they release the crappy baseline version of the games on the consoles first, and then add all the spectacular effects later. So after the underpowered and shitty systems get their terrible version of the game, the developers start working on the good one. They start cranking up the graphics to infinity, and yes, I know, graphics aren't everything, but they sure are something. I mean, imagine you've got the same game twice. Once it looks great, once it looks terrible. Which one are you gonna play? So apart from cranking the graphics, they allow you to change those to tailor it to your liking. Maybe you want more FPS, maybe you want higher graphic settings, it's all up to you. And you're not all collectively served that 30 FPS muddy texture fest. You can still have a muddy texture fest, but it'll be like 240 FPS if you want that. And there's no real reason for the developer or publisher to wait until the PC game's finished for the console version to be released. So they release that first, and then work on the PC version, and then release that. And trust me, we can wait. I mean, it doesn't even feel like waiting because we have so much we can play. And what's a console player gonna do after his 8 hours of fun? They pretty much have to play every single game on the console because they have fewer games, and the worst thing about it is they don't last that long. And now let's move to every console player's second favorite topic. Controller versus keyboard and mouse, which one's better? Let's base this off shooter games first. For shooter games, the mouse movement left, right and up, down is translated into camera movement left, right and up, down. The position of the thumbstick is translated into a velocity in which the camera is moved left and right and up and down. It's just a way more complicated way of input. This is probably the reason why every console shooter has aim assist built in. The game's practically playing for you. That's a very clear sign that the controller isn't fit for purpose in this case. There was a match between the best team of Titanfall players on the console and a PC team. And even though the console players still had aim assist on, they still had what would be considered a cheat on the PC, and they were still quite evenly matched. A link to an article will be in the description. So would you rather have the game hold your hand and tell you how to shoot all the time, or would you rather be able to do it all yourself? And now as a contrast to that, you have things like racing games. Let's say you want to steer 50% to the left. On a keyboard you will have to have pressed the button for left for 50% of the time during the entire steering maneuver. That means you'll have to button mash like crazy. But precisely and crazily. Whereas on a controller you can just move the thumbstick 50% to the left and be done with it. So I'd never play a racing game on a keyboard if I had a controller lying around. But here's the thing. You can plug in a controller into a PC. Plugging in a mouse and keyboard into a console is a bit more complicated and doesn't always work with every game. While if a PC game doesn't have native support for a controller, you can use things like Joy-to-Key. It converts the controller button presses into keyboard key presses. So even if the controller is objectively better, which it isn't, that's not an advantage for the consoles. Playing a shooter game with a controller is the worst. Playing a racing game with a mouse and keyboard is also the worst. But on a PC you can choose which one to use. Often console people talk about the good old days of the PS2 or the Nintendo 64, and while those had some pretty good games, you can play all the good old PC games on current PCs. The PC is no doubt the backwards compatibility king. Some consoles do some backwards compatibility, but the PC just outshines the competition. Not to mention that you can pretty much emulate any old console on your PC. I still play games from the 90s and you can go back even further than that. You can even run a virtual DOS system on your computer. I briefly touched on this earlier, but a giant advantage that the PC has is game mods. I mean, some games have to be modded because Bethesda is terrible, but some other games can be modded to add more content to them. Titan Quest, for example, is a Diablo 2 clone that plays in ancient Greece. There are some mods that increase the number of enemies and some mods that just give you different character classes to play around with. And out of the Warcraft 3 map editor came some of the most beloved games we know today. So this adds more diversity to already good games. And looking at The Sims, you can just download custom content such as different outfits. Left 4 Dead is also a great example of a moddable game. You can download different maps and play through whole different adventures. Especially in a horror type game, it's quite bad if you're very familiar with the map. So you can just download a new one and be completely helpless once again. I think the PlayStation briefly wanted to offer mods, but it all fell apart quite quickly. I'm not sure why that is, but it's absolutely terrible. So bearing in mind that a lot of console exclusives are slowly moving to the PC, what reason will there be to buy a console in the future? And if you made it this far, please consider subscribing.